Welcome to Engage ICT Online. I'm Sarah Jane Crespo. Should the ability to easily access the internet be an affordable, regulated right, or should it remain a privilege for those that have the money to pay what it takes to get it? The bipartisan Internet for All initiative is bringing $5.7 million to Kansas to improve broadband access. How should it be spent? Kansas Commerce is conducting surveys and focus groups as we speak, and you have a chance to weigh in before the end of April. But now let's talk about what impact we may see with this influx of dollars. On our panel, we have Jade Piros de Carvalho, Director of Broadband Development at Kansas Commerce, Jaime Nix, Wichita's Director of Libraries, and Joseph Shepard with Lead for America. Thank you all for joining us. I want to start with an overview here, and for this, I'd like each of you to weigh in. Jade, let's begin with you, especially with regard to the affordability of broadband. How pervasive is the lack of internet access in urban environments?
That's a great question. First off, I just want to for bringing attention to this issue and for allowing us to have this conversation, because I do think it's important to the future of Kansans and our ability to all of us to fully engage in an increasingly technologically driven economy. So we know that there is a digital divide, and historically the digital divide has been defined as those who have access to the infrastructure for broadband and those who don't. Does broadband run past your home? So exciting bipartisan infrastructure. There's greater recognition that that is an incomplete understanding of the digital divide. You can have infrastructure running past your home, but if you don't have the opportunity or the ability to afford it, you may as well not have access, right? And even if you can afford it, if you can't get a device or don't have the skills necessary to fully use that device to engage in the economy and our democracy, then it's kind of an underutilized asset, right? And so there's a much broader understanding of that digital divide. And so in Kansas, we have an estimated 15% of Kansans who are kind of under-sourced as far as like access to broadband. But what we understand from our partner the federal level, Education Superhighway, out of they're a nonprofit out of DC, is that 2/3 of the unserved in the nation fall in that affordability gap. So it's not just that it's not about do they have access or not, it's that they can't afford it. And many of those are in urban areas, but they're also in rural areas. This is what is so interesting about this issue. It's nonpartisan. It really transcends rural urban divides. It transcends a lot of demographics, but it's important to note that certain demographics have been historically disconnected at a greater degree, similar to in the housing, like digital redlining. I'm sure we'll get into all of that, Sarah Jane, so I don't want to talk over all of that, but I just kind of wanted to set the stage with this. We have a digital divide in Kansas. Some of it is infrastructure related. Much of it is ability related. And then on top of that, we have nuances between socioeconomic classes and races and other people with other abilities and other populations.
Thank you. I appreciate that overview. Joseph, what challenges have you seen people face who lack the ability to connect through your work at Lead for America?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I really love that Jade talked about this issue being a multifaceted issue. So we can't look at the challenge of digital inclusion or digital equity as a one size fits all. What works in emerging communities, as Lead for America would define it, urban communities as others would define it, will not necessarily be the solution for our rural brothers and sisters in communities like Dodge City or Goodland, Kansas. And so specifically for me, as someone who grew grew up in an urban community, low income poor, who was one of those folks that probably would not have access years ago to the basic needs to continue my education or get online and check my banking account. I think about the children and families, particularly of the public school district that I live in Wichita, Kansas. And to paint a picture for folks who are listening, you know, Wichita Public Schools is one of the largest school districts in the state. It's about 47,000 students. However, according to federal guidelines, about roughly 78% of those children come from homes of poverty. So when we think about the lack of access, I think about those children who often are relying on the technology to continue their education that will then go on to feed into our workforce, right? That will then go on to support our economy, build our business and industry. But again, as Jade said, right, there's some nuances there. When we also look at our public school district as an example here in Wichita, where I reside, there are over 100 languages spoken in our school district, right? So when we talk about digital access, digital literacy, we also have to be very intentional about making sure that we're providing that literacy in the languages that are accessible and absorbable to the children and families that desperately need it, because access without knowledge is very dangerous and very destructive. So we have to make sure that we're doing both. And I just firmly believe that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. It'll take longer and it'll be lots of work, but luckily we have people like Jade, we have people like Jaime who are tackling this work alongside in collaboration with organizations like Lead for America.
Well, that's a great segue right to Jaime and the work at the Wichita Public Library. How does this issue look from your vantage point, Jaime?
You know, COVID definitely exacerbated it, but I think libraries have public libraries especially, have long been filling the gap for internet access. And it's honestly, it was an accidental role that we stepped into back in the 90s when the internet was becoming more prevalent and needed for job readiness, for education. We're seeing more and more people coming to the library because they need to have access, not just to the internet, but also devices. So right now it's kind of interesting how, you know, many of us have smartphones, but we don't have data plans. And so one of the things at the library, we offer a book a librarian service, which has probably been the most valuable thing that individuals have expressed back to us, because they get one-on-one assistance with a library staff member who can help them with the digital literacy. Right now, we're also holding classes or opportunity signups actually for the Affordable Connectivity Program in a lot of our key neighborhoods where there is low access. But not a lot of people are coming to get signed up because they still can't afford it with discounted rates, or they don't believe that it's too hard. The process is too hard. But what we end up doing is just walking alongside everyone when they come in. And I think part of us too, part of it, we're also recognizing how critical digital inclusion and digital equity are for race, economic, educational, and social equity. When school's out, what are all the kids going to do in Wichita who don't have home internet? I hope that they come to the public library, but we're not open all the days of the week and all the times that people are needing us. So it's definitely a huge need that continues to grow. I like that more conversation is happening with different partners and at higher levels, because when we're in an accidental role fill, I know that our efforts, it's a temporary stopgap fix for a bigger question, which is about infrastructure.
So how did we get here? Are there trends or data that you can share to illustrate the issue of broadband affordability? Jade, is the lack of competition among providers driving what we see? Are there just some like figures that you can share that kind of paint that picture?
Well, I think that's part of it, right? Part of it is, so, you know, my specialty on the policy side is kind of in the rural spaces, so it's a little bit different. But, you know, there is a market failure issue in these spaces where there aren't a lot of people. And so it's difficult to make a business case to go into these areas. So that's one piece. But the same can be said in urban areas, especially when we're dealing with multi-dwelling units and like low-income housing. It's really hard to convince the private sector to fill that need. So I think that's part of it is, and again, it comes back to redlining. Like there was housing redlining, there's digital redlining now. And I don't want to ascribe malintent to it necessarily. I don't think it's necessarily intentional. It's just a calculated business decision. We can't make that work. But what that does is it sets up an entire generation of people in that space to not be able to again engage in our economy. And it's not acceptable, because let's be clear, when we're talking about digital equity, we're talking about something that undergirds the ideals of America and the idea of the American dream, right? That equity, that equality of opportunity. And so we need, as a society, to live up to the ideals that this country was built upon and provide that equality of opportunity. And so it's just a small piece, right? Housing, childcare, there are a lot of things that go into this, but I think we got here because we have a really extraordinary market economy that solves a lot of our problems. But this is a gap that it has been unable to solve. And again, what's so exciting about this opportunity, this generational, once in a lifetime moonshot opportunity, is that we're looking at shoring up that gap in a much more holistic way, in a way that includes everyone. I mean, when you go back and you look at some of the stimulus that we did after the wars, and a lot of people were left out of that, right? And the IIJA is trying to bring everybody into the fold. So we got here somewhat by design, but somewhat just by default of the way our economy works. And we're in a position at this time in our country's lifespan that we recognize that's not going to work anymore. Like, maybe we caused this, but what can we do to fix this? Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah, and it makes me think back to that initial idea of, does internet need to become a regulated right, like any other utility, instead of like an add-on if you can afford to pay for it? And I wonder if there are historical examples of other times when we've made that switch and that have brought us to where we are now. Jaime, let's come to you for a second. Can you share a little bit about how the pandemic exacerbated problems with internet access?
Absolutely.
Or did it reveal the issues that were kind of already there?
Yeah, I think we knew the gap was there. I think we were trying our best to serve it in-house. But when the pandemic happened and libraries across the nation had to close their doors like other organizations did, because we didn't know enough about the virus to know how to navigate public spaces, it really showed, it exacerbated it. We had individuals at the time that COVID started. I was working in Tacoma, Washington, around Pierce County, just south of Seattle. It was rural and unincorporated and suburban Washington state. And so we had individuals, and I hear it happened here in Wichita too, who would just come sit against the wall of the library with their device so that they could maybe get an inch of internet access. They were in our parking lots. Libraries were scrambling to figure out how to get the Wi-Fi asset that we had outside into spaces where people can safely socially distance and be able to access. I think as we saw that with the public. It also impacted staff. When I worked in Pierce County, I found that with my public services staff, a good third of them didn't have home internet because they lived in remote parts of the county. Individuals who were at the foothills of Mount Rainier weren't able to get internet access. And so we scrambled, even with our internal infrastructure, to get devices that had cell phone. Is the cell phone coverage strong enough to be able to support a Zoom meeting or to support remote work? It was a really interesting juggle and struggle, but fortunately, there were funds that were available for public libraries and other entities to look at and look to some different service models. So we were able to subscribe to multiple access points, Wi-Fi hotspots that were circulating. And I'll tell you, not a single one of them in 2 years has been on our shelves waiting for someone to check it out. We have an exceedingly long hold list. We were able to get subsequent money to do, if you don't have a device, you can check out an internet or Chromebook and a hotspot as part of our Library of Things collection. Those two have been exceedingly popular with residents. I think the hotspot more so than the device that we're finding, but we could probably quadruple the amount of hotspots that we have and know that we're not even scratching the surface of needs.
Wow, that is incredible to hear. What a need. Yeah, that is amazing. I have a listener email here who wanted to ask a question for the panel. And it says, we are falling behind the rest of the world in terms of internet speed. It's no longer a luxury, it's a necessity, but ISPs keep treating it like the former with very little competition. How is this initiative going to help with these problems? And are we going to get a public option? So those are the questions from this Engage ICT listener. Jade, do you want to address those?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that is an excellent question, and it's very accurate. You know, America has fallen behind as far as infrastructure investment and speeds. And so one thing our office is doing is we are prioritizing what is called fiber optic internet, which is scalable, long-term infrastructure that will take us not just 5 to 7 years into the future, but if you do fiber right, they they allow you to kind of amortize it over 20 years, but it's really a 40 to 60 year investment. And the conduit, the duct, if done right, is a 100-year investment. So our office is prioritizing that infrastructure so that we can be sure that we're not under investing, because we're not going to get this opportunity every 5 to 7 years. Let's be honest, the last 2 to 3 decades, the American government has invested billions of dollars in shoring up the digital divide. But what they have done is done these stopgap measures just enough. And it's created this system where you have to continually invest. And if you don't, these communities that you've invested in have fallen behind. So let's do it once, do it right, and don't, buy cheap, buy twice kind of a situation. So that's how we're trying to address it. I will note that our allocation from the Infrastructure Act could not be enough to get to universal connectivity. So we will have to consider alternative technologies. But again, first and foremost, we want to prioritize fiber optic connections and then look to what is the next best technology in these areas that are so high cost or so remote that we can't get to them. And were there other questions in that, Sarah Jane? I feel like I missed half of that question.
No, I think you covered it pretty well there, Jade. Thank you.
Great.
Joseph, let's come back to you here. Do you think that things are looking better or worse for people who struggle to afford connectability in today's sort of post-pandemic world? And are things changing just in general for the better or for the worse?
Sarah, I look at, I can point to what Jaime talked about the roles libraries played in connecting individuals to the access that they need and continue to do that. I can point to the creation of Jade's office, the Kansas Office of Broadband Development, as a sign that we're moving in the right direction. I can talk about Lead for America's American Connection Corps program and how we are deploying fellows all across the country with a special focus on Kansas, where we are headquartered, to work alongside governmental entities, nonprofit organizations, to help close that digital divide and to do it well, and then paying them to do it, because that's how much we care about this issue. So I think we are headed in the right direction. And it kind of goes back to what you asked earlier, right? I wonder if there is something that we can point to in our history where acts have been passed that have made sort of tools and resources a necessity rather than a luxury. And if we look at the Rural Electrification Act of 1936, I believe it was, where installment loans were provided to rural communities to simply have electricity. When we had the luxury of electricity, not all of our communities geographically had that access. So the federal government passed this act to provide loans to rural communities to ensure that our brothers and sisters in rural communities had that access. And I see that being something very similar that the Kansas Office of Broadband Development is doing, that our federal government is doing, is we are recognizing that everyone deserves this access. You know, we rely on it for our calendars, we rely on it for our alarm clocks, we rely on it for the pictures that we hold as our keepsakes for memories, we rely on it for our education. And for me, working for a 100% remote organization, I rely on it to pay my bills, as many Americans do. And so that is why I feel that we have noticed that this is an issue that we have to talk about, and we have to also move the needle. But also, I'll talk about e-commerce as a form of economic empowerment. I have been able to watch many companies, organizations, and businesses look at e-commerce as a way to empower their economy. And it is a sign to me that we not only see the need for digital access, but we're understanding that it plays a larger role in our day-to-day lives. In Kansas, we say that small business is the backbone of our economy. I can't imagine what those small businesses on main streets across rural communities in Kansas did when COVID-19 hit their communities and did not have the access to infrastructure to scale their business and or to put their business on e-commerce to still bring in that revenue, right? I think of our minority business owners who may not be ready for a storefront, but desperately need to start somewhere. And e-commerce is a great option, right? They need access, they need the infrastructure, they need the literacy. And so I would say that offices like the Kansas Office of Broadband Development, Lead for America, the federal government, the list goes on, recognize that, and we're actually working together to move the needle. So that's a long way to say, absolutely, we're headed in the right direction. We just have to make sure that we rest, but we don't quit. And as Jade mentioned, that I'm sure there's going to have to be some alternatives along the way, but we have to be reminded that, you know, there are people counting on us, not as a luxury, but truly as a necessity.
Let's talk a little bit more about the options that we will have with this influx of money. And, you know, Jade, you were talking about the different sort of fiber optic cables versus other ways of bringing internet into rural areas in particular. But are there, are there kind of like several different main pathways that we might go down? And how does the public weigh in on what would benefit them the most?
Okay, that is a great question. One thing to recognize about all the grants that have gone through our office is that they're grants that are called last mile, which means from your internet provider to your home or business. And so that includes one specific provider. Now, our federal partners have a small grant program for what is called middle mile. And that is a program that goes from the global internet to these last mile providers. I don't want to get too much into the technology, but what that means is that provides an opportunity for multiple providers to connect into what is called an open access network, and would potentially bring multiple providers into a market, thus lowering cost and increasing speeds and customer service. So there are those options through the Infrastructure Act, but they are somewhat limited. Kansas was one of the states that applied for that grant, and we will hear in the next month or two whether or not we were successful. But I do think that when you're looking at a long-term strategy for access and digital equity in our state, that has to be on the table. Again, historically, everyone's always thought about my connection to my home or business, and they don't really understand these other pieces. But without that middle mile strategy in our state, we're never going to get to universal connectivity, and we're never going to get to the affordability we need, especially in rural areas, because we're not going to have multiple entrants into the market. So that's one thing we're doing. But I did want to put a plug in on the affordability side while I have this forum for ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program. It is a program through the Federal Communications Commission that offers a $30 subsidy for low-income households on their broadband subscription. And all you have to do is have a less than 200% of the federal poverty level household income, and you can you're eligible for this program. President Biden connected with 20 providers across the country to get them to offer a 100 megabit circuit, which is a pretty high speed internet circuit, for $30. So that means you can get internet free if you sign up for ACP. And we have, again, partnered with our federal partner, Education Superhighway. You can go to getacp.org/Kansas and find out how to sign up for that. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to do so.
Yeah, that sounds like a good resource. And it kind of brings me to the next question that I wanted to ask. From your vantage point, I want to direct this to all of you, actually. What is something that people don't understand or just need to know about this topic? Jaime, can you start us off on that one?
Yeah, I think it's probably time for us to identify that the internet is as essential as water and electricity. I think understanding the access, the information, and then if you don't have digital access, that you're lost, you're left behind. It's light years until you can catch up. I think gosh, honestly, part of my worries have been where the conversations are and how we connect across so many different partnerships, so many people doing good work to try and close the gap with education, with infrastructure. I think it's just, it's like you were saying, now's the time, right, to do it right. And I think that is going to be reliant on collaboration from our top our elected officials, our school leaders, our library professionals, and really figuring out how do we do this so differently than we've ever thought before, because no one should not have access.
Yeah. Joseph, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say that tackling this particular challenge right now is not only going to be a complete game changer, but it's going to ensure that we are all future ready. There's a study that says that many of the young people who are in school now, the jobs haven't been created yet that they will go into, but it more than likely will require some form of technology and digital access. And so I think when we think about this issue, when we think about affordable housing, which is impacting all of us across the country, when we think about education and how to provide multiple pathways to education in a way that is accessible and affordable and convenient to many different lives, right? I think digital access plays a role in that. When I think about the businesses that hold up our communities and the industries that hold up our communities, and the way that business and industry are moving over to remote, impacting digital access, right? When I think of people like Jaime who are doing what I consider to be the Lord's work, right? Like not only just being a place where people can receive literacy, but truly where they can get the education and the employment, job readiness skills, and honestly go and have access to connect with family members simply over FaceTime, right? We have to solve this issue. And when we solve this issue and when we work together to do it across lines of differences, political, ideological, race, socioeconomic status, geographic diversity, we change the game for everyone and we lift each other up. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what every Kansan should want. That's what every American should want. And that's what I hope people see when they think about this issue. It's far beyond the infrastructure. It's far beyond the literacy component. It's much larger. And we've got to do a better job of painting that fuller picture for folks.
And Jade, what do you think is something that people don't understand or need to know about this subject?
Yeah, I mean, I think both Jaime and Joseph said it really well. It's not some peripheral to our everyday lives. It's something that is essential. And broadband access and digital equity in the form of skills development is again an opportunity equalizer and has the ability to uplift people, businesses, communities, and those that aren't bought in to that idea will unfortunately be left behind. So I do think though that people get that. I just don't think they fully understand how to make it a reality in their community, or maybe they have already been left behind and they're just resigned to the fact that maybe it's not in their cards to have this, but that's not acceptable. It's internet for all. It's universal connectivity is the goal. That's the goal of our office, affordable, universal connectivity. And so if there's anything I can impart during this talk is that, this effort is for every Kansan, right? And we will find a way, but we need to engage with our office. And so what we have been doing is going on what we've called the Kansas Broadband Roadshow, which is a listening tour where our staff members of our office have been going across the state, every corner of the state, and listening to these lived experts who live in a digital divide about what are your concerns? Do you have a broadband provider? Or if you don't, what is your experience? If you do, is it affordable? Is it one provider? Do you have the devices you need, laptops, tablets, et cetera, hotspots? Do you have the skills you need? What are those gaps? So what we're doing is compiling all that information from this listening session, these listening sessions, and we'll be putting together a 5-year digital equity strategic plan for our state and a 5-year broadband access plan for our state. And so I really encourage people to go to our website, kansascommerce.gov/broadband, and look at these, the dates for these sessions, and please attend one. We also have a statewide survey if you're unable, but ironically, like broadband access, you're not gonna be able to do it online, right? So that's why we're going in person to meet with so many people. But I would say, yeah, that is what people don't understand. If they don't have this access and they've been without it for so long, it's easy to just throw your hands up and think, it's never going to come to me. But we are committed to bringing that to you, but we need you to help us help you. So interface with us.
Okay, so that survey is an important thing that people can, a way for them to help in that effort. And I also want to ask Jaime and Joseph if you both would weigh in as well on ways that you see that people might help with this initiative or just with the issue of internet access for all. Jaime?
Yeah, I think probably if anyone knows of anyone who doesn't have internet at their home, I think it's a really great opportunity to connect them to their local public library, where we've got ourselves briefed on all of the different application points where you can get affordable internet, and we'll guide people through that. I think as far as help that people can provide is when there are opportunities to talk about job training, about continuing education, about connecting with family and friends. I think those are the times where we need to be reminding ourselves, and not everybody has. And if that's the case, what can we do? And what we can do is talk with our state elected officials. We can talk with our city government. I think, there's a lot of innovation that's happening right now with technology, tons of innovation, right? And that means that we can likely solve this. But there are just ways to, gosh, there are benches that we could be installing throughout the city that have wireless hotspots. In the summertime, the library is going to be gifted a transit bus where we're going to create a mobile hotspot. So we're 15 or more people can connect to us whenever we're anywhere in the city. But I think that those are really small tactics. And it's really a larger strategy conversation, which simply means that we have to change our rationalization that internet isn't a luxury, it's a necessity.
Joseph, what about you?
Yeah, I said earlier that it takes all of us, and I think it truly does. And so, particularly as it pertains to Leap for America's American Connection Core program, we're heading into our second year, and we're hoping to deploy over 100 fellows across the country, with a particular focus on deploying many of them in Kansas, specifically in our rural communities. We want our emerging urban communities too, but we are also specifically focused on our rural communities. And we know that there are organizations out there who are probably saying, I think this is important, but I've got my hands tied with so many other things. Well, that's why we have fellows who can come in and work alongside you. Chances are they're going to be from your community, because that's a big focus for us, is we want talent from their hometowns to return to their hometowns to do the work to make home a better place for other people. And so, over the last year alone, our fellows have worked with digital literacy workshops, job skill training, have applied and worked alongside organizations helping with grants, have helped bring in money to help solve this issue. And so you name it, we want to work alongside you to, again, make sure that there's economic opportunity available for your community, because truly, as both Jade and Jaime have said, this is an issue that we should all be able to get behind. And so check out our American Connection Corps Fellowship. And I'm going to call on organizations who have the financial capacity to place a fellow in a community or an organization that may not have that financial capacity to do so. And I'm also going to say that if you are interested in having a fellow with Leap for America, do not allow the financial commitment to stop you from reaching out to us, because at the end of the day, we want every Kansan to have access to the internet, and to know how to use it to their greatest benefit.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining me for this important conversation. I really appreciate your time. And be sure to check out the Wichita Public Library's resource guide for more on this topic. We'll have a link in the comments section and on our website. You can also find the recording of this and other Engage ICT discussions at engageict.org to share with friends and family. Let's all take that survey and make sure that we are helping others to access it as well over this next week or so. Again, that survey link is in the comments on our Facebook page, as well as at engageict.org. And for anyone who may be in the Hutchinson area or who would like to go to Hutchinson, we will be coming back to this conversation with more of a rural angle on Monday, April 24th. So I hope that you all will be able to join us for that. It will be at Hutchinson Community College, Monday, April 24th, starting at 5:30. Engage ICT is sponsored by Keith and Georgia Stevens. For KMUW, I'm Sarah Jane Crespo.